Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. And if you're new, welcome. My name is Adelina and I make videos about living in my tiny house on wheels and living a more intentional life. I thought today I would talk about the 5 fears that really held me back from starting my tiny house dream of living in my tiny house on wheels. I think that they're probably not unique. They may be fears or concerns that you have in your tiny house journey, and I just wanted to go over them and share my experiences so that you don't feel like you're the only one that's going through that. The first time I actually considered tiny houses on wheels, really the first time I ever saw them, was probably in 2014. But it wasn't until 2016 that I actually got seriously interested in this possibility and realized, or at least thought, that I could make this a reality. So that was quite a while before I actually started my build and took possession of my house, because I moved into the tiny house in July of 2019. I think one of the biggest concerns that I had, worries, fears, was that I would have to get rid of pretty much everything I owned. That extreme minimalism would be required in order to live in a tiny house on wheels. Now, if you've watched any of my other videos on the topic, you know that I did get rid of a lot of what I owned. I got rid of pretty much every piece of furniture that I owned and a lot of things that I didn't need. However, the thought that I would have to do that, the thought that you had to be a minimalist in order to live in a tiny house on wheels, and I obviously wasn't a minimalist, really held me back for a long time from really believing that I could make this dream a reality. And what I realized, probably later than I should have, was that it wasn't about not having anything. It was about having the right things for me and for my lifestyle. So you'll know that I have, if you've watched my house tour, and I hope you have, you'll know that I actually have a lot of storage in this tiny house. It's not as tiny as some of the tiny houses, because I wanted to be sure that it was big enough for me to live in full time, and I wanted to have certain things still, in my possession. So there's a lot of storage in this tiny house, and I actually probably have more things than most people expect. And I got rid of all of the things that didn't matter to me, that I didn't need, the things that were holding me back. But the belief in my mind that you had to be an extreme minimalist in order to live in a tiny house, and that I would have to get rid of the majority of my things, really did slow this process down. Because every house that I saw when I was originally doing my research and really discovering the whole tiny house movement was super tiny, and therefore really did require you to have only the bare minimum of things, because there just wasn't room for everything in their houses. And I hadn't yet come to the obvious realization, obvious now, that you don't have to build an extremely tiny house unless you want to, that you can build the house that makes the most sense for you and for your lifestyle and what you want to do with it. So I would say that the number one thing that slowed this process down, that really concerned me, was the fact that I believed that I would have to get rid of virtually everything and become an extreme minimalist. And that was something that I just didn't want to do. Another thing that really worried me about moving into a tiny house was I thought that if I did that, I would never be able to have family come and visit, maybe stay. I wouldn't be able to have friends over for dinners, and that really held me back, because while I am an introvert, I'm still a social person, and I certainly like to have my kids over and be able to cook dinner for no reason at all, just because it's a Friday, but also for Easter and Christmas and Thanksgiving and things like that. I really had to think that one through, and over time I realized that, first, I don't have big gatherings. I don't have huge family dinners. I don't have a huge family here, and really it was just my kids and maybe their partners if they had them at the time, and maybe a couple of friends over at once for wine and a good chinwag, as my sister-in-law likes to say. And that I can still do in my tiny house, because having that in my mind meant that I made sure to build this living room area big enough that I could have more than just one other person here at one time. What I realized was as long as I took these things into consideration, like the fact that I wanted to have my family be able to visit, or my friends come over, or even have family come and stay. If I took that into consideration while I was doing the design of the tiny house, then I would still be able to do those. The concern that I wouldn't be able to still have my family come over, have family or friends that were traveling through town stay, and be able to have my loved ones for dinners, for special occasions, really did concern me when I was in the early stages, and may very well be something that you're thinking about because you have a large family, or if you're slightly older, you might have grandkids that you want to be able to still have over. Just remember that you can design your tiny house exactly the way you want it and have it be perfect for you. It doesn't have to be perfect for me. It has to just be perfect for you. So if you have those things in your mind, if they're important to you, don't let that hold you back, because you can design your tiny house around that. Another concern I had, and probably you do as well, if you're the only person in your family or your circle that is even remotely interested in tiny houses, I really did have this concern that my friends, my family would think I was crazy, that the world would think I was crazy. Because when you do something that's different than everybody else is doing, you're an outlier. And that means that people somehow, for some reason, feel like it's okay for them to offer their opinion on what you're doing. And that certainly happened to me. And when I first started talking about wanting to build a tiny house on wheels and sell my townhouse to do that, I had a lot of people think I was nuts for far too long. Maybe, looking back, not that long, but really far longer than it should have. That actually slowed the process down. What I realized was that if I never did this, I would regret it for the rest of my life, and that it was something that was really important to me. And that is when I adopted the mentality that a dream without a plan and action is just wishful thinking. And I stopped letting what other people thought of what I was doing actually matter. Because really, we go through life, and I have learned this in my 55 years, we go through life so worried about what the rest of the world is thinking about what we're doing. So what I realized was that nobody was thinking about what I was doing. They were too busy, worried about what other people were thinking about what they were doing. And that's just something that clicked in my head. Also, for the people that weren't positive, that were making negative comments, or maybe just reminding me of all the obstacles and all the things that could go wrong, what I realized, they weren't happy with what they were doing in their lives. They weren't following any dreams that they had. And for some reason, it felt uncomfortable for them to watch somebody else go after their dreams. So don't let that hold you back. It doesn't matter who thinks you're nuts. It doesn't matter, because what you are, when you do something different than everybody else, is you're an outlier. And that means that the majority of people are not doing what you're doing, but you're going to find your tribe. And that's what I recommend. Find people that are doing what you're doing, that are excited about the same things, that are already living in tiny houses, and make that your tribe, make that your community. All that matters is that you're following your dream. Number 4, the fear that I would never find a parking spot for my tiny house on wheels. This was one that I got to admit I was concerned about, especially early on. I started my build at the end of 2018, and I didn't know where I was going to park my tiny house on wheels. It was a big concern for one of my best friends in particular, because I think it actually kept her up at night. She was so worried about where I was going to park this thing, the fact that I had already started my build, and then shortly after that I put then my townhouse on the market for sale, really kept her up at night. And I will admit that at the beginning it worried me as well. But like with so many other things in life, it's all a matter of educating yourself. You don't know how to do anything or how you're going to do anything until you do the research and figure it out. And that is what I did. At the beginning, I really worried that I wouldn't find a parking spot for my tiny house on wheels. And if I did, I would be in the middle of nowhere and away from all my family and friends. And I wasn't quite ready to leave the city yet because I wasn't 100% a remote worker yet, and I wasn't quite ready to be that far away from my kids. What doing the research did was allowed me to make sure that my build would give me the most options for finding a tiny house parking spot. And what I mean by that is how I registered my trailer, what kind of builder I used, that sort of thing, what kind of materials I used. The next video I'm going to do is actually going to be on some of the tips that you can use to give yourself the highest chances of finding a legal parking spot for your tiny house on wheels. So doing that research really helped. It put my mind at ease, and it allowed me to make the decisions I needed to make in my build to give myself the most options. Now, I didn't actually find a parking spot until my house was probably 2/3 of the way done. But it never occurred to me that I wouldn't find a parking spot. If it wasn't in the city, I was quite certain I could find a spot in a farmer's yard or a farmer's field somewhere outside of city limits where the rules were a little bit weren't as strict as far as what you could live in. Yes, it would have meant that I wouldn't have been in Calgary, and it would have meant that I would have been a bit farther away from family and friends. But to me, it was still worth it because living in my tiny house on wheels was the priority, and I knew that I wasn't going to be in Alberta forever. It was only going to be for a couple of years at the most, and then I would be moving to British Columbia, and BC is much more tiny house friendly. The fear of not being able to find a parking spot is probably, for most people, the number one fear, and I totally understand that. I certainly had it. But my advice would be to do the research in your location, because every province is different, every country is different, every state will be different. Do the research and find out what the requirements are for your location, and then make sure you're building to as many of those as you can so you give yourself the most options. Despite what all the people around me were saying and thinking, again, see number 3, everybody's got an opinion, I knew that I would be okay. I knew I would find a spot because I had done as much research as I could. And then here's another thing that I would really recommend. Talk to everybody you know. Let them know what you're doing, let them know what you're building, and ask around. Does anybody have any land that they own that they would be okay with you parking on? Actually, the whole idea of where I am parked right now came from a friend of mine who mentioned it in passing, and it had never occurred to me. I don't know if I would have found this spot if he hadn't mentioned it. And because of the research I had done ahead of time, that meant that I could actually park in this spot. So yes, it's a concern. Just do your research. Don't let that hold you back. Obviously, there are spots in Canada, in your country, I'm sure as well, where you absolutely won't be able to park on a tiny house on wheels. But a lot of places will allow now tiny houses on foundations. So is there a way that you can make that work with your tiny house dreams? You know, it doesn't have to be on a trailer with wheels. It can be something that you can bolt down to a foundation, and then when you want to move it, just unbolt it and put it on the back of a truck and move your house that way. But that was number 4 on the concerns that I had and the fears that I had that held me back probably longer than it should have. Number 5 may not apply to all of you, but it certainly applied to me. It was that as a single woman, I wouldn't be able to figure this out because I had never built a house before of any kind, that I wouldn't be able to figure it out, that I might get taken advantage of in the process, and that somehow I couldn't do it. What I had to remind myself was that really you can do anything. You just have to do the research. So that's what I did. In order to get comfortable doing this by myself as a single female, or any single person, if you've never done this before, or maybe all of a sudden you find yourself single, or you're a little older and you've never done anything like this before, or you're really young and you've never done anything like this before. It can be very scary, and it certainly was for me. I will not pretend that there weren't nights that I stayed awake with that feeling in the pit of my stomach, thinking, I'm never going to be able to figure this all out for myself, but you can, because I did, and I'm not special. Just do your research. And that's exactly what I did. I made sure to choose the right builder because I knew I wasn't building it myself. And so I talked to multiple builders, and I found one that I was 100% comfortable with. She happens to be a female builder who owns the company, and she's awesome. Jen from Teacup Tiny Homes. But it easily could have been a male builder. I did talk to some that I really liked, but I found one that I trusted would help me through this process when it came to things that I didn't know about and things that weren't my area of expertise. You really just need to educate yourself. You need to ask a lot of questions. My builder has an expression that I love, and I use it all the time, and it is, everything is figure-outable. And it's absolutely true. Because let's face it, until we did anything for the first time, we didn't know what we were doing. I didn't know how to drive a car. Then I learned how to drive a car. I didn't know how to keep a kid alive. Then I had a couple. And I figured it out, and so will you. There is the fear that you might meet an unscrupulous, that you might meet somebody who wants to take advantage of you, or that you might make decisions that are wrong because you don't know what you're doing. So ask the people in your life that you do trust. Ask your family and friends, ask your dad, ask your mom, ask anybody who's got that kind of experience for their advice. But this is your dream house. So trust your gut and make those decisions yourself based on the information. This is not the most difficult thing you'll ever do in your life. It certainly isn't the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. But it is the most exciting. And yes, sometimes it felt like I was stepping off a cliff without a parachute, but I figured it out, and you will too. That is number 5 of the things that, the concerns I had, of the fears that I had, of the kind of roadblocks that I threw up in front of myself as I was going through this process, and especially before I started building. If you're going through these things, just know that everybody does, and that it doesn't mean that you're doing the wrong thing. If this is your dream and you want to do it, then you absolutely can. You just have to make a plan and take the actions and trust. You just have to have faith that what you're doing is going to work out because you've done the research. And you're working with good people. You will get where you want to go. You will end up with your dream tiny house. It will function for you exactly the way you want it to and you need it to. And you will find a place to park it because you will have done the research ahead of time to give yourself the most options for parking. Anyways, guys, I hope you're doing well. I hope that this whole situation isn't getting you down. Here in Alberta, we are headed back into phase 1 of lockdown. But we're going to get there, and summer is coming. The sun just came out behind the camera, so that makes me feel really good because it has not been great weather here. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe. It's still a fact that about 85% of my viewers are not subscribers, and when you subscribe, it just lets YouTube know that the content is of value, and then it recommends it to other people who are going through the same things that we are, and asking the same questions that we all have. And then it also means that there are more great people part of this family. So that's pretty cool too. I will see you on Wednesday for a cooking video, and then next weekend for a discussion on how to give yourself the best options to find a parking spot. Take care. Hey, Sophie. Come lie down. Come get white fur all over my black pants. I know.